Black waitress is mocked for her scars, until a veteran is shocked to recognize the unit tattoo. The sun poured through the dusty glass of a small southern diner, cutting long golden lines across faded leather booths and chipped salt shakers. Outside, the heat pressed down on the town like a heavy memory, but inside, everything moved in slow repetition. The scrape of cutlery, the low drone of conversation, the occasional sizzle from the kitchen. Mariah floated between tables with practiced silence. Her uniform was clean but faded, her hair pulled back into a simple bun. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, it was brief. Her arms, even under her long sleeves, drew attention. When she leaned forward, when she reached high, her scars were visible. Ugly, jagged, unmissable. They climbed her forearms like lightning frozen into flesh. People stared. People whispered. "And you? Where are you watching from? A quiet room? A parked car? Somewhere far from where this story began?" Let us know in the comments, because every place has its history, and every person has theirs. The corner booth by the window had its usual occupants, 4 locals who never missed a day of small-town gossip and lukewarm coffee. Their voices were low, but not low enough. "Must have been in some kind of accident," one said, swirling his spoon. "Accident? Nah, that girl's been in trouble. Look at those cuts. Either she was on something or she was running with the wrong people. I bet she used to be in prison. Probably did time and came back here reformed." They all chuckled quietly, watching her carry a plate to another table. Mariah didn't react. She didn't have to. She'd heard it all before. Every rumor, every careless comment. They spoke like she was made of glass, cracked and flawed, as if her silence gave them permission to fill in her story themselves. She wiped down the counter and turned toward the kitchen, her shoulders straight, her gaze steady. Then the door opened. A quiet chime signaled his arrival. No one looked up until they heard the deliberate, uneven steps. A cane tapped the floor in rhythm with booted feet. He was in his late 60s, white, lean, and composed. His gray hair was cut close, and his shirt was pressed with military precision. Despite the limp, he walked like a man who never let pain slow him down. There was something in his posture, like discipline stitched into bone. He scanned the room, his eyes, sharp but calm, landed briefly on everyone until they settled on her. Mariah returned his gaze only for a second before looking away. She reached for the coffee pot and approached the counter. "Black coffee?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Please." She poured, setting the cup in front of him. He thanked her and she turned to walk away. That's when it happened. Her sleeve caught slightly on the edge of the counter. It rolled just enough to reveal part of her forearm. There, almost lost among the scars, was a faint tattoo, faded but unmistakable. A dagger with wings, numbers below it, an old painful mark of something that was supposed to be left behind. The man stared. His hand froze over the cup, his jaw tightened. Mariah noticed too late. She pulled the sleeve down quickly, her shoulders tensing, but it was already done. "Serious, where did you get that?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the diner like a warning shot. Mariah didn't turn. Calmly, "I think you're mistaken, sir." "Firmly, I'm not," he replied. "That's a unit tattoo. 117th Recon. I served with them. Broken Falcon, Kandahar." Silence fell over the room. The men at the corner booth stopped talking. The cook leaned forward through the kitchen window. Even the jukebox in the back seemed to dim. Mariah turned slowly. Her eyes were unreadable. "Skeptical, you're sure?" she asked. Gravelly voice. "I know that ink like I know my own scars," the man said. "There were only 6 of us, and only 2 who made it back after the ambush." Solemnly, he paused, his voice low, steady. "I was one, the other. She was reported Kia. They called her Sparrow." Mariah looked down at the coffee pot in her hand. The silence was now louder than any words. She placed the pot gently back on the burner. Resigned. "They said a lot of things," she whispered. The man blinked, his breath caught in his chest. "Awestruck, you're her, aren't you?" Mariah didn't answer, but something in her stillness confirmed it. A flicker of recognition passed between them, not just of identity, but of pain, of what had been buried, of a story the world had tried to erase. The gossipers now stared for a different reason. One of them shifted uncomfortably in his seat. No one had ever thought to ask Mariah who she was before, just assumed she was no one. And yet here was a man with decades of service in his eyes, standing quietly in awe of her. Because he knew. Because he was there. Because the scars weren't shame, they were survival. The next morning, the diner smelled like it always did, burnt toast and stale coffee. Mariah unlocked the door at 6 a.m. sharp, same as she had every morning for the last 3 years. She flipped the sign to open, then walked to the back, tied on her apron and took a breath. She didn't want to come in today, not after yesterday. Word had spread overnight. This town didn't need phones or apps for gossip. It traveled faster through glances, whispers, and the tight smiles of small-minded people. When she'd gone to the grocery store last night, 2 women had stopped talking the moment they saw her. At the gas station, the clerk stared at her like he was trying to place a puzzle piece that didn't fit. And now, she was bracing for more of it. The first customer walked in at 6:15, a local trucker who didn't say a word, just nodded, took his coffee, and stared at the countertop instead of her. Always the first to judge, last to apologize. But today, they were quiet, curious, watching. Mariah moved like clockwork, delivering plates, refilling cups, refolding napkins. She didn't look anyone in the eye. She didn't have to. She could feel the shift in the air. No one was laughing at her today. They were waiting. And then the door opened again. He was back. Jackson entered slowly, leaning on his cane, nodding at her like they were old friends. He took the same seat at the counter, set his weathered cap beside him, and waited until she walked over. Wearily. "Black coffee?" she asked, not looking at him. Gently. "Please," he replied, watching her closely. She poured in silence, quietly. "You didn't have to come back," she said after a moment, thoughtfully. "I know," he said, "but I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday." Mariah said nothing. He sipped the coffee. "You still remember it all, don't you?" Her hands froze over the pot. Somberly. "It doesn't go away," he continued, softly. "Not for people like us." Still, she didn't speak. She turned and walked to the other side of the counter, as if she could hide behind her routine. At the booth near the window, one of the gossipers leaned to whisper to another. Jackson turned his head just enough to hear them. "What's a woman like her doing with a military tattoo?" "Probably faked it, probably trying to get attention." Jackson placed his coffee down slowly, stood up with effort, and walked over to their table. The diner fell silent. He looked directly at them, sternly. "You ever jump out of a Chinook under live fire?" The 2 men stiffened. Gravely. "You ever carry the remains of your teammate in a torn duffel bag because there was nothing left to bring home?" One of them stammered, stuttering. "I was just saying." He leaned closer. Intensely. "That woman served in a unit that never got a welcome home. She was blown apart and still made it back. What were you doing that year? Watching football?" The table went dead quiet. Jackson walked back to the counter and sat down. Mariah hadn't moved, but her hands were shaking now. She stared at the silver napkin holder in front of her. Softly, "No one's ever said anything like that for me," she said quietly. Thoughtfully. "Maybe they should have," Jackson replied. "But this place, it forgets people, especially the ones it doesn't know how to respect." Later that afternoon, when the rush died down, Jackson was still there. He looked up at her, reminiscing. "I remember you, the night before Broken Falcon. You were sitting on the edge of the tent, fixing the scope on your rifle." Mariah said nothing, admiringly. "Your call sign was Sparrow. You were fast, scary accurate." She finally looked at him. Her eyes weren't angry, but they were hollow. Hollowly. "Why did you come back?" she asked. He hesitated. "Maybe because someone else finally did too." Mariah sighed and wiped the counter again. "They didn't want me to. Not really." "Your scars?" he asked gently. She nodded. "They didn't come from the explosion," she said. "Not all of them. Some came after. Some came from trying to prove I still belonged, when everyone treated me like I didn't." Jackson lowered his eyes. "You didn't fake your death, did you?" he asked. Mariah gave a small, dry laugh. They did it for me. Paperwork mistake, wrong body ID'd. By the time I got out of surgery, the military had already buried me. The next morning, Jackson arrived before sunrise. Mariah hadn't even flipped the sign to open yet when she saw his reflection in the glass. He stood outside holding something wrapped in a cloth, weathered, folded neatly under his arm like it had meaning. She opened the door. "You're early," she said. He stepped in, gave her a small smile. "Didn't sleep much?" "Yeah," she nodded, same. He followed her inside where the lights buzzed and the smell of prep work lingered. Raw onions, fresh biscuits, and bleach from the night cleanup. The town was still quiet. No customers yet, just them. Jackson placed the cloth bundle on the counter and slowly unfolded it. Inside was a photograph, old, creased, but preserved with care. Mariah stared at it. There they were, 8 soldiers in dusty fatigues crouched in front of a transport truck in Kandahar. Sand in their hair, sun in their squinting eyes. In the corner, almost hidden, was her younger self, short hair, cleaner skin, still scarred but fewer of them, holding a rifle with calm, unshaken hands. She reached out and touched the corner of the photo gently. "That was 2 days before the ambush," Jackson said quietly. "That's you, right?" Mariah nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "I kept this after they said you died," he continued. "Couldn't throw it away. Something told me they were wrong." "They weren't wrong," she whispered, "just incomplete." Jackson looked around the diner. "You live here?" "Close by, small trailer behind the gas station," she said, almost ashamed. "It's cheap and quiet. That's all I want." He took a slow breath. "You ever talk to anyone from the unit? Anyone else survive?" Mariah shook her head. "I was discharged under medical blackout. They kept my files sealed, said it was too sensitive to reopen. I didn't even get access to my own paperwork." Jackson leaned back. "Sealed files usually mean one of 2 things. Classified op, or someone covering something up." She looked at him sharply. "I didn't do anything wrong, Jackson. I never said you did. But they treated me like I was the threat." At 7:03 a.m., the first customer walked in. Jackson folded the photo away and slid it into his jacket. Mariah moved back into routine. But this time, something had changed. Her steps felt heavier. Her hands slightly slower. She kept looking at the door, the windows, like she expected someone to walk in who wasn't supposed to. By 9 a.m., the diner was half full. The usual crowd. But this time, the energy was different. One woman at a booth was scrolling through her phone, showing a post to another. Mariah caught a glimpse of the screen. Her own face, grainy, taken from outside the window the day before. Caption: "The scarred girl at the diner, heard she faked her military past." Dozens of comments, some mocking, others questioning. One even tagged a local reporter. Mariah felt her stomach drop, disappointed. "They're turning it into a game," she whispered to herself. Jackson leaned forward, curious. "What is it?" She showed him the screen. He took a slow breath, his jaw tightening. "Phew. It's starting," confused. "What is?" Thoughtful. "Doubt. Public doubt. That's how it begins. Once people question your past, they think they own your future." Mariah blinked rapidly, holding back something. Sad. "I didn't want this," she said. "Ha. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't ask to be remembered." Emphatic. "But you deserve it," Jackson said. "You bled for this country. You buried pieces of yourself in a place most people can't pronounce. That should mean something." Bitter. "To you, maybe," she said. "To them, I'm just another rumor." Later that day, a man in a black windbreaker entered the diner, middle-aged, clean-cut, didn't order anything, just sat at the counter and stared at Mariah. She approached him cautiously. Cautious. "Can I help you?" He smiled. It wasn't kind. Calm. "Mariah Avery." She hesitated. Hesitant. "Who's asking?" He placed a small badge on the counter, barely visible under his palm, smooth. "Call me Dell. I work for a private agency. DC-based. You're a hard woman to find." Jackson stood up from his booth, demanding. "What do you want with her?" he asked. Dell smiled again. Calm. "Relax. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just have a few questions. You see, her file from Kandahar wasn't just sealed, it was sealed by order of someone at DARPA. Mariah's eyes widened. Surprised. DARPA? Dell nodded, knowing. And guess what? That unit tattoo? 117th Recon? It was listed under a classified R&D initiative, one we've been trying to trace for years. Mariah stepped back, urgent. Why now? Serious. Because someone's looking for you, Dell said. Someone with access, and they don't want you talking to people like him. He nodded toward Jackson. Mariah glanced at Jackson, whose face had hardened into full military mode. Firm. You need to leave, Jackson said, calmly. I'm just delivering a message, Dell replied. They want her quiet. They always have. Then he stood, nodded again, and left as calmly as he'd come. Jackson turned to Mariah. Why would DARPA be connected to your file? Mariah shook her head. I don't know. I never knew. But now I'm starting to think. Maybe the explosion wasn't an accident. That night, Mariah didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her cot in the small trailer behind the gas station, staring at the old photograph Jackson had given her. Her younger self stared back, rifle in hand, eyes steady, like she hadn't yet tasted betrayal, like she still believed service earned safety. She traced her finger over the unit patch barely visible on her sleeve. 117th Recon, Sparrow. They buried her, then buried her story. But why? The knock came at 2:14 a.m. sharp, measured. Mariah reached for the small .38 she kept under her pillow, a habit she hadn't broken since the desert. When she opened the door, Jackson stood outside, his breath visible in the cold. You said you didn't have your file, he said. I think I found a piece of it. He handed her a manila folder, aged and watermarked. It had no name on the cover, just a classified stamp and a blacked-out seal. Mariah stepped aside, and they sat at her tiny table under a flickering bulb. She flipped the folder open. Inside were scans of internal memos, military briefings, redacted medical reports, and one photo, her, but not from the battlefield. This one was from a lab. She was unconscious, strapped to a metal table, surgical equipment in the background. A hospital tag dangled from her wrist. Her breath caught. This isn't real, she said. It's real, Jackson replied. One of my old contacts at the VA owed me a favor. I asked him to pull anything linked to your service number. That's what came up. Why would they do this? I think they were experimenting, he said. Not just weapons, people. They called it bio-regeneration trials, high-risk recovery. You ever notice how fast your skin healed after the blast? Mariah's hand brushed one of her newer scars, the one that had sealed shut in half the expected time. I thought it was luck, she whispered. DARPA doesn't believe in luck, Jackson said. They bury their mistakes. And you, Sparrow, you were their prototype. Mariah stood up, pacing the room. This can't be happening. I'm just a waitress. I don't want any of this. You were never just anything, Jackson said. That's why they're afraid of you. The next day, the diner buzzed with whispers. Dell hadn't returned, but his presence lingered. People asked Mariah if she was in trouble, if she'd been working with the government, if the scars were part of something contagious. Mariah said nothing. She moved through her shift like a ghost wearing a name tag. Jackson sat in his booth again. This time, his hands shook slightly, not from fear, but fury. Serious. They want people to turn on you, he said. They're seeding fear, doubt. Thoughtful, if something happens to you now, no one will ask questions, just like the first time. Concerned, then what do we do? She asked, determined. We tell the truth, questioning. To who? Confident. To the one place no one expects, the town. That Sunday, Jackson walked into the church down the street. Mariah followed. The pews were full, small-town faces, the same ones who whispered over coffee and judged behind closed curtains. Jackson didn't wait for the pastor to call on him. He stood up mid-sermon. Assertive, I have something to say. People murmured. He turned to face them all, passionate. This woman, he said, pointing to Mariah, served this country in a unit that no longer exists on paper. She survived an ambush that killed everyone else. She was used by the government and discarded like nothing. The pastor tried to intervene, interjecting, Sir, we don't do politics here. Angry. This isn't politics, Jackson said, his voice rising. Defiant. This is a town that mocks scars it didn't earn and ignores bravery it doesn't understand. He turned to the crowd, challenging. You think she's a stranger? She's more of a protector than any of you ever knew. Indignant. And if you think silence is safer than standing beside her, then shame on every pew in this room. A hush fell. Someone stood up in the back, a woman, elderly, eyes full, solemn. I lost a son in Kandahar, she said, emotional. If he were here, he'd want me to stand with her. Another voice, regretful. My nephew's in the Marines. He'd be ashamed of the way we treated her. And then slowly, people stood. Not everyone, but enough. Mariah's chest rose and fell like she hadn't breathed in days. Jackson turned to her, reassuring, You're not invisible anymore. Outside the church, the sky hung low with clouds, but there was something lighter in the air. Mariah walked ahead, her steps more sure. But then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Cold voice. You should have stayed dead. She stopped cold. Jackson caught the look on her face. Concerned. What is it? She showed him. His voice dropped. Grave. They know you're talking, serious, and they're coming. The text didn't come from a burner phone. That was the first thing Jackson noticed. Mariah had shown him her screen outside the church, and it didn't take long for his military instincts to kick in. Whoever sent that message had used a masked number, but not a disposable one, which meant the sender wasn't hiding on the run. They were hiding in plain sight. By the next morning, a quiet tension gripped the diner. Mariah opened late. She hadn't slept, and the bags under her eyes were starting to look permanent. Every bell over the door startled her just slightly. Her hands didn't shake, but her eyes scanned everything. The street, the booths, the reflections in the windows. Jackson sat at the far end of the counter with a black notebook open in front of him. His notes were detailed. Times, names, shadows, patterns, old habits resurfacing. Whoever sent that message, he said, they're watching this town, and they're close. Mariah refilled his coffee, eyes locked on the street. Then why not just finish it? If they wanted me gone, they've had 3 years. Because it's not about removing you, Jackson said. It's about discrediting you before they do. Turn you into a threat first. That way, no one questions it when you disappear. Mariah swallowed hard. They want to erase me again. Not if we speak first. That night, Jackson pulled out a box from his truck, old files, patches, even a hard drive he hadn't touched since retirement. He hooked it up to Mariah's TV inside the trailer. On screen flashed names, unit IDs, deployment photos, faces she hadn't seen in years. Brothers, sisters. One by one, she read the names of her fallen. But something caught her eye. One report from 6 months before Operation Broken Falcon. Subject Sparrow selected for biological reconstruction trial. Clearance, black level. She clicked it. Access denied. Jackson frowned. That's deeper than I thought. I had top clearance in '09. That's beyond military, possibly private defense contracting. Mariah leaned forward. Why would a recon soldier be part of a trial? Maybe because you survived something no one else did. The next day at the diner, she noticed someone new at the counter. Young, clean-cut, blonde buzz cut, military-style boots, not from town. He ordered a soda, didn't touch it, just watched. Jackson walked past him on his way to the restroom and noticed the outline of a comms device behind the ear. He returned to Mariah and, "We've got a tail." Mariah nodded, barely blinking. "So what now?" Jackson looked her in the eyes. "We make a scene they can't control." Later that night, Mariah made a decision. She walked into the town library and used the public access terminal to upload her story. A letter written plainly and emotionally, titled, "To Anyone Who Thinks I Don't Belong Here." It told the story of a woman who was drafted into a recon unit, blown apart in an ambush, then sewn back together by a program that treated her like a machine. It described the silence afterward, the sealed files, the scars, and it ended with, "Determined, they tried to erase me once. They failed, serious. If anything happens to me again, you'll know it wasn't an accident." She uploaded the letter to a military forum under an anonymous name. then sent it to 3 news outlets, then posted a redacted version on the town's Facebook page. By morning, the diner was a war zone of opinion. Some supported her, others doubted everything. The worst of them called her a fraud, dismissive. She just wants attention. Accusatory. This is stolen valor. Skeptical. There's no way someone like her was ever in combat. But then, something changed. A comment under the post, firm, I served with Sparrow, grateful she saved my life in Helmand. Confused. I don't know why her name disappeared from records, but emphatic, she's the real deal. Posted by user ReconGhost41. More comments followed. More soldiers, more memories. Stories of a quiet sniper who never missed. Of a medic who dragged 2 men out of fire. Of a woman who disappeared too soon. At the diner, Mariah stood taller. But her strength was tested the moment the window shattered. A brick, wrapped in duct tape and hate. It crashed into the countertop while customers screamed. Glass rained down like shrapnel. Mariah hit the ground. Jackson dove across the table and pulled her under the counter. Outside, a car peeled away. Mariah's hands shook, but not from fear, from rage. She stood up slowly and faced the crowd of shocked customers. Angry. Now you see what they're afraid of? Blood dripped from her palm where glass had cut her. She didn't even flinch. Jackson drove her to the ER, but she refused stitches. Resolute. Scars are my story, she said. The video of Mariah standing calmly amid shattered glass spread fast. Someone at the diner had filmed it and uploaded it with the caption, "She didn't flinch." After the brick hit the counter, she just stood there bleeding. Overnight, the views crossed 100,000. By dawn, her inbox was full, some hateful, others apologetic. But one stood out. Sender, R. Taggart. Subject, Sparrow message, direct. I was briefed on Haven in '08, meet me. Attached was a location. A truck stop, diner 2 towns over. Jackson read the message with narrowed eyes, surprised. General Richard Taggart, he said, serious, retired, used to be director of special projects. If he knows about Haven, this could blow things wide open. Mariah looked uncertain, cautious. It could be a trap. Jackson nodded, determined. Or it could be the first honest answer you've been given in a decade. They drove out that night. No headlights, side roads only. Jackson's truck hummed low beneath the stars, both of them quiet, their breath fogging the windows. When they arrived, the diner was nearly empty, just a sleepy waitress behind the counter and an older man sitting in the back booth. He didn't look like a general anymore, more like a farmer. Weathered, tired eyes. But when he saw Mariah, he stood and gave her a small, respectful nod. Weary. You're Sparrow, he said, firm. I never believed the KIA report. Mariah sat across from him, Jackson beside her. Impatient. What do you know about Haven? She asked directly. Taggart didn't flinch. Explaining. It started as a post-trauma stabilization initiative. DARPA wanted to see if soldiers who experienced extreme injury could be biologically adapted to survive faster. You weren't supposed to be a test subject. You were a last-minute substitution. Confused, why me? Blunt, because you were available. Disposable in their eyes. Young, quiet, no political connections. Female. Mariah clenched her fists. Technical. They used nanostructure tissue therapy, coded gene overrides, accelerated nerve regrowth, Taggart said. Impressed. It worked better than anyone expected. You shouldn't have walked again, but you did. Bitterly. And then they buried me, she said bitterly, matter of fact. They didn't think you'd survive past a year, but you kept living. Jackson leaned forward, concerned. Who's still watching her? Taggart hesitated. Hesitant. Not DARPA anymore. The program was privatized, bought by a defense contractor called Norline Dynamics. They're not worried about her secrets. He paused, grave. They're worried she might expose theirs. Mariah stared at him, defiant. What happens if I go public? Taggart shook his head. Grim. They'll silence you. And me. This only ends one way. You expose them. Or they erase you. Back at Mariah's trailer, Jackson installed a set of security cameras, motion lights, and a backup generator. They weren't taking any more chances. At midnight, another text came in, threatening, "You think you're brave now?" Commanding, "Check your door." Mariah opened it slowly. There, taped to the handle, was a burned copy of her military dog tag, melted at the edges, her name half erased. Jackson examined it. Serious. "They're escalating." Whispering, "Let them," Mariah whispered, determined. "I'm done hiding." The next morning, Dell returned. This time, he didn't wear a smug grin. He walked into the diner without speaking, placed a USB on the counter, and sat down. Mariah stared at it, wary. "What is it?" "Serious." "Proof," he said, "of Project Haven. Before they erased the digital trail, I copied fragments." Jackson picked it up, surprised. "You're helping us now?" Dell looked tired. "Tired. I was ordered to monitor you, but orders change, and after what they did to you, after what I saw in that photo from the lab." He paused. Resolute. "You're not the threat. They are." They uploaded the files that night onto military whistleblower boards, private veteran forums, even to a trusted journalist friend of Jackson's in D.C. Screenshots, test protocols, video stills. Mariah, lying unconscious, a doctor holding a scan showing accelerated spinal regeneration. Notes titled, "Subject Sparrow, Human Resilience Phase 2. Then the final entry, "Terminate subject if public exposure risk increases." Mariah stared at the screen, her entire life reduced to a paragraph. A risk, a test result. Sad. "They were never going to let me live," she whispered. Grim. "They still might not," Jackson replied. Later that night, as the diner closed and the rain poured outside, Mariah walked through the kitchen to lock up. That's when she saw him. A figure in black, standing inside the walk-in cooler, waiting. She turned, but he was fast. He grabbed her wrist. She elbowed him hard, grabbed a skillet, and swung. He stumbled. Jackson charged through the swinging door with a fire extinguisher and knocked the man off balance. They dragged him outside, pinned him in the alley, and yanked off his mask. A local deputy. Mariah's eyes widened, shocked. "You?" He spit blood, pained. "They paid me, said you were dangerous, said you weren't human." Jackson looked at Mariah, his voice like ice, cold. "They've started embedding people in the town." Somber. "This was a warning," she said. Jackson nodded grimly. Grim, which means what comes next? Won't be. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Were you in a quiet room, a parked car, or somewhere far from where your own story began? And if you believe stories like Mariah's matter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the world needs more truth, more heart, and fewer forgotten voices.